All right, gang. Welcome aboard. Welcome once again to the Mac Forum Weekly Video Chat. This is the October 2016 edition. Uh, might be a kind of short show today. A couple of the tips and tricks that I had planned to show you have turned out to be a bust, but we'll get to that in the later in the show. We'll talk about that a little bit. First of all, welcome to our newest member, your guide, YRGUIDE, your guide. Hope I pronounced that correctly. Welcome to them and to all of our newest members. If you want to ask a question on the forum, be sure to become a member. You have to do that in order to be able to ask a question. It doesn't cost you anything. Just go through the normal registration procedure, and we'll be glad to answer the questions that you have. It doesn't cost you anything to lurk. And you don't even have to be a member to lurk and look for answers. But to ask questions, you need to be a member. So, welcome to all of our new members. All right, let's move on into some forum related things that I want to be sure that I touch on today. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to skip the new post update here. And I want to get to this thread, which deals with deleting Siri on the Mac. As most of you know, with the advent of Mac OS, which is the current version, Mac OS Sierra, they've included Siri in the Mac operating system. And as you can see, if I go up, I've already enabled it. If I go up into my menu bar, click on my Siri icon, it will bring up the Siri interface and ask me what I want it to do. It'll even show me some things that I can do with it. All right. Now, some people have decided they do not want Siri involved on their machines at all. It's annoying to them. Some of our members have reported being repeatedly asked for uh, Siri to activate. And let me just quickly show you some of the options that you have. You can turn voice feedback off or on. You can tell it where your mic is, and also a keyboard shortcut to activate Siri if you want to do it from the keyboard instead of doing it from the menu bar as I did just a moment ago. Now, here's the key thing. If you click enable Siri, that's what's going to activate it. If you uncheck this option, you should not be getting repeatedly asked to add Siri or to activate Siri. So this thread kind of deals with that a little bit and has some suggestions for what might be causing that problem. You can't actually delete it, but you should be able to keep it from repeatedly asking you if you want to um, be in to use it. So check that out if you're experiencing some issues with Siri. We're going to have some more Siri information here as we go along. I'll get to that in just a moment. There are some other issues relative to Siri that we'll kind of touch on today. In fact, a lot of what we talk about will be Siri related. Okay, next thing that I want to get to, let me just flip my page here. Once again, this is another tip for Siri. This tip, which comes to us courtesy of Macworld, I originally picked up the tip um, on the Cult of Mac website, but they had gotten the article from Macworld, as you can see. And what this tip is doing, is leveraging some features in the Mac OS to give you a functionality very similar to the Hey Siri option on an iPhone or an iPad. Those of you that have used Siri on an iPhone or iPad, know that you can activate it without touching the home button by simply saying, "Hey Siri," if you've enabled that feature. And this is a workaround, or if you want to call it that, a hack that brings that functionality to the Mac OS version. Now, I'm just going to scroll through this. I haven't enabled this one yet. It's been a while since I looked at this. So I'm just going to quickly scroll through so you can see it. First of all, you're going to make sure that you have gone into the Siri control panel that I showed you just a moment ago, enabled Siri, and you want to look for the keyboard shortcut menu. Okay. They have some predefined uh, keyboard shortcuts for Siri already, but what you want to do is to choose the customize option. And now we're going to go into after you've done that, you want to go into the system preferences again and click on the keyboard icon, add a shortcut, okay, here. All right. And we're going to look for the one called dictation. Make sure that dictation is turned on and that you've selected enhanced dictation, as you can see in this screenshot. Okay. And then what you're going to do is to, you may, depending on how your Mac is set up, have to download some dictation tools that allow for offline use. You may or may not need to do that. It depends on how you've got things set up on your Mac. Okay. If you have multiple microphones, you're going to be asked which microphone you want to use. All right. Once you've done that, here's where we start to enable the Hey Siri function. All right. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to show all of our system preferences so you can see all of them and go to the accessibility icon. You want to go into the accessibility features. Okay. And on the left side of that preference pane, scroll down until you find dictation. Okay. And you're going to change some settings that will allow dictation to function with Siri and in fact activate Siri. The box that you want to check is enable dictation keyboard phrase. So I'm going to click this box. That's going to allow me to use a phrase to start dictation as opposed to hitting a keyboard shortcut. So I'm going to click this box and then I'm going to enter the word hey here. Okay. And when I do, this is what's going to allow it to say, hey, when I say, hey, Siri, it's going to perform to activate the dictation functions, activate Siri. Okay. And this tells you what to do. It goes through it step by step. I won't read through all of it, but it's an interesting approach to leverage some functionality of your Mac to give you a functionality that Apple did not build into the system directly. Personally, I would love to see them enable this feature to give you a way to easily activate Siri by voice in the Mac OS version without having to go through these steps. But you can also customize the vocal commands, and you'll see that there in that tip. Some of you who have been following the show know that I've had some, shall we say, disagreements with Siri recently. In fact, in not one of my prouder moments recently, I insulted Siri, and its response to me was, "After all I've done for you," and I promptly proceeded to hurt myself laughing at the result. But that's an idea for you to experiment with. I'm going to be testing this a little bit in the coming days. I want to see if I can customize Siri a little bit more and maybe give it some better functionality on my system. I don't dislike the way it works, but I think there are some things that I could do to integrated into my own working habits a little bit better. Uh, and so that's one tip for you to get you started. Another thing I want to mention about Siri, and this isn't so much a tip as a complaint, and it comes from Walt Mossberg, as you can see over at the Verge. And his question is, why does Siri seem so dumb? Okay. Now, you may think that's a little bit harsh, but as you go through the article, Walt mentions some things about Siri that he finds somewhat frustrating. Things that Siri either cannot do or does not do as well as you would expect. Um, for example, and I remember this from reading through the article earlier, um, the way in which Siri deals with well-known people is kind of interesting. Let's suppose that you have, as Walt mentioned, let's say you've got someone like, and I'll just use this as an example. I think it may be the same example used in the article. Let's say you've got someone like Steve Jobs in your contact information, but you really want to um, pull up a bio of that person. When you ask Siri, it may, instead of showing you the bio, show you the contact card for that person. So it's becoming confused in some cases by things that it really shouldn't. And there are other things. For example, now Siri uh, will sometimes give you some sarcastic answers to questions that, although they are correct, annoy people. For example, ask it to divide a number by zero, and you will sometimes get some interesting answers. And depending on upon your sense of humor and how busy you are at that moment, you may or may not consider it um, very funny. But Mr. Mossberg goes on to point out some things that Siri should have been an advantage for Apple in the beginning, but other digital assistants in Walt's view, other digital assistants like the one provided by Amazon and Microsoft's Cortana have in some ways surpassed uh, the functionality of Siri. And he mentioned some things that happen to Siri in everyday use as well. I mean, not all of us are going to have Steve Jobs in our contact database and have Siri get confused about whether to provide us with a bio or a contact card. But there are other things. For example, I found it kind of odd when this is not one that's mentioned in the article, but just from my own experience, I found it kind of odd recently when I asked Siri to identify a song that was playing on my Mac. I had AirPlay working, the stereos in the same room. The microphone was clearly picking up what was being played. And I asked Siri to identify tracks on several different albums. I found it kind of interesting that Siri identified the title of what we shall, for lack of a better word, call the more obscure track. Okay, so in other words, let's say I ask it for 3 or 4 tracks from the same album. One or two of them are fairly well known, and two others that may be a little lesser known. Siri did a pretty good job of identifying the lesser known tracks, didn't always identify the well known track, even though an app like SoundHound for my phone was able to identify the better known tracks. For example, another thing that Siri stumbles with sometimes is and Mr. Mossberg mentions this in the article, asking it questions like, what's the first day of the World Series? Or identify the presidential candidates of the two major political parties here in the United States. Siri does not do as good a job of identifying that information as you would think that it would. And it also does not, and this is one of the things for me, um, just as a personal note here to jump away from the article just a little bit. One of the things that I hope is fixed in future incarnations of Siri is the types of information that it reaches out to. There are just certain types and categories of information that Siri just does not handle very well, and that other um, voice control systems seem to handle a little bit better. For example, Siri will work with some of the HomeKit functionality, but it doesn't right now handle some of the things that Alexa can handle, or at least does not seem to handle them as reliably in some cases. I think that as that aspect is opened up to more developers, if that SDK becomes opened up, as I've seen some suggestions that it will, you may see more functionality with Sierra, and I kind of hope so because it's kind of neat to be able to talk to your computer and deal with some things that way. And I think if you can continue to improve Siri, people are gonna find it very useful. The question is, can you get the momentum back on that and catch up or surpass some of the other voice control systems that are out there? All right, and on this next article that you see, this is Kirkville from Kirk McLaren's Kirkville, and I included this merely as he references the same Walt Mossberg article, and then there's a comment that he included in his post on this from Daring Fireball, and it deals with something that I think I included this link because I think Mr. McLaren's hit on something important here. Uh, the problem with Siri is this: it's improved gradually as it's come out. I know I did not have a lot of success with it on the iPhone when I first started using it, and it wasn't that it didn't recognize my voice. It actually did that reasonably well. It was more an issue with um, me and I asking it to do something that it could not do. Okay. And here's the point that the iTunes guy, Kirk McLaren, makes that I think is interesting. If you try Sierra and it fails to do what you want it to do, okay, you may, after one or two failures, depending on how catastrophic, for lack of a better word, these failures are, you may not go back and try it again at a later date. So let's say that you try it today on August 16th, um, and it doesn't do something that you want to do, or it doesn't do it in a way that seems easier to you or more fluent in your workflow. And now let's suppose that, say, November or December of this year, Apple releases an update that improves that particular aspect of Siri. Unless you're following Apple news, following the tech news, you may not realize that that's been improved, and may not go back to it again to find those new and improved features. So it's kind of a catch 22. It doesn't do something you want it to do, and if you don't go back and try it periodically, you don't discover that that feature has been added, and that assumes for a moment that you're aware of the fact that these improvements have been made. Okay, so that gives you some idea of where we are in talking about Siri these days. And this one, this is something. This particular article. I'm going to scroll back up to the top here. Uh, I'm going to include this. I'm not going to try to summarize this by reading it. It's some tricks for adding dictation tricks to the iPhone and iPad. Now, this will be most useful to you if you find that you are in range of a wireless network throughout the day or regularly through the day. Because here's the thing that you have to be careful of when using dictation on your iPhone or iPad. The dictation protocols essentially send things up to a server for processing and then come back and act on what you're doing, what you've asked it to do. So that means that there's a lot of data being pushed back and forth. And if you're on a cell plan, that may be more data than you want to use. But some of the things that you could do with it are, for example, enabling dictation to compose longer emails or um, the, for example, text messages. As you can see, this relies on using once it's set up, and the article in Macworld there from Kirk McLaren describes how to get this set up. Once you do it, when that microphone appears, you can click on it and then you start dictating what you want done. This is the kind of interface that you will see to let you know that the microphone is picking things up. And then after some processing, for example, let's say you're composing an email. When you're done, after a few seconds, it gets translated into text in the message. And you simply, what you're going to do once it's set up is tap in the text area of a message. And then instead of using the keyboard, uh, tap the microphone, dictate what you want, tap done, and it gets processed. This I'm probably going to start using a little bit more than I have in the past because I have a tendency to fat finger, if you will, the keyboard. I will go to hit one key and hit a different one. It's just I'm not by any means a great typist, and no phone that I've ever had ever from anybody has been one that I've been comfortable typing longer messages on. I do okay with the real short messages, text message quickly in something like GroupMe or um, or messages, but to type extended amounts of things, even on the iPad where you have a larger screen, I just it's better. The larger the screen is, the better, but it's still not something that I enjoy doing a great deal. And I don't use that feature enough to carry around a Bluetooth keyboard with me. That would be one way to solve the problem, but I just don't use it enough to justify carrying around that type of keyboard. So this is something you might want to take a look at. You'll probably enjoy it. Some people are very good at this, but once again, because it is dependent on your connection, you're going to want to be somewhere either where you don't have a plan limit, a data plan limit, or you're going to want to be somewhere where you have access to a wireless network, and you're probably going to want to be somewhere where you have a pretty good connection. Things kind of slow down a little bit if you've got a weak connection, obviously. All right. And this last little thing that I want to get to is not really a how to, it's just something that I find interesting to watch for and see if this turns out to be true. As you can see, this comes from Buster Hain at the Cult of Mac site. It's from just a few days ago, and it deals with the rumor that there is a new type of keyboard from Apple that may hit the market. The projection right now is 2018. What makes this keyboard interesting, and it's one that I've kind of made myself a note to watch for, is that essentially it would be using this sort of e-ink technology to do the lettering on the keyboard. So it's not physically printed on the keyboard. It's using that similar ink technology, similar to what you see in, I believe it's similar to what's used in the Kindle series, to project the letters onto the keyboard. Now, why is that important? Okay, uh, a couple of things that you could do with this, assuming that the SDK permits it. If this turns out to be true, a couple of things you could do with it. Um, just to give you a few examples, uh, I sometimes use programs like uh, iMovie and Final Cut in particular. Although I don't use that one, Final Cut's a program that has a lot of keyboard shortcuts, and people who use Final Cut on a regular basis know those keyboard shortcuts quite well. And same could be said for things like Microsoft Word. And there are some specialized keyboards out there, like say for Final Cut, for example, that have all these keyboard shortcuts. But I find them a little confusing if I'm not working in that program. So imagine, if you will, you've got this keyboard with all the Final Cut keyboard shortcuts, but you're not working in Final Cut. Now, personally, I find that a little confusing, a little distracting to have all those different things on top of the actual letters for your keys. Now, what if instead of that, you could load this keyboard and tell it, say, for example, I'm in Final Cut, and then the keys would shift and show you the Final Cut key sequences. Or maybe I want my keyboard in French. I have my system set in French, and I want my keyboard set to French. Well, let me put it this way: you can do that in the operating system. If you're in France and you buy an Apple keyboard, it's going to be marked with that language generally. Okay, but what if you're traveling somewhere and your keyboard, or you're somewhere else, and right now, if you don't have your French keyboard, it's going to be marked in English or whatever is handy. Whereas this could change as the need arises. If one user is sitting here using this Mac and they are fluent with French, the keyboard could project the French keyboard layout. A different user using that same keyboard, if I'm understanding this article correctly, could then have that keyboard project the English or US layout, or Spanish, or you name it, whatever is available that various developers decide to support. Uh, there's a lot of potential here if it comes to fruition at a price that uh, people are willing to pay. Now, there already are a couple of keyboards that do project the keys using lighting. And the good thing about that is, here's another usefulness for it. And this is something I just thought of as I was talking to you. Um, some people, for whatever reason, have their keyboards, after they've been using them for a while, the lettering will start to disappear. Something about their skin and the oils on their skin causes the lettering to fade on the keyboard, to the point in some cases that after a few years of use, you can't tell where the letters are. They've kind of faded away, particularly if you have these keyboards that have white lettering on a black background. With this type of keyboard, if the keys, the lettering on the keys is being projected onto the surface of the key, you shouldn't have that problem. So I put that in there just to give you an idea, just to show you something that might be coming up. And when it does, remember that you heard it first here. Uh, that's going to just about do it this week, guys, for this show. As I say, several of the how-to projects that I had in mind have not quite panned out. I'm still trying to figure out why they did not work, particularly the one with using the smart folder concept to organize the application folder. I'm going to go ahead and put a link to an article that I wrote about smart folders in the show notes. The article is several years old, but the essential process of creating smart folders has not really changed significantly. So if you're not familiar with smart folders, check that out. It will probably come in quite handy, and perhaps you will think of some uses for it that I haven't. And that's going to do it for this week. Until next week, this is your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude. If you got questions or a tip that you'd like to see me cover and talk about, or anything like that, improvements for the show, let me know. Post it in there is a Mac Forum Sunday chat thread in the forum. Post there, and I'll be glad to try to see if I can address whatever the question might be. And until next week, I hope that you enjoy your time at Mac Forum.